people are paid a lot of money as public servants to kind of do the job, because ministers can't take responsibility for making everything happen for obvious reasons. But yeah, it is a fudge
Your
in my
point,
view.
your point is I think, Kate, and I think it's quite right actually, is that if you are serious minded, if you are committed down from the kind of gusty principle generalities to the kind of the substantial real manifestation of land reform, then you would take this seriously. That it wouldn't be a piece of paper that you just put in front of the minister. That actually you'd look for opportunities in very small ways across all ministerial departments to advance this kind of agenda, and that just isn't happening. And I think that must be fair and actually tends to reflect one of arguably the most tedious and persistent vices of Scottish politics, which is a sort of abstract, very principled discussion which doesn't really tend to translate into something substantial, detailed, systematic on the ground. And if ever any politician exists for whom such a model is kind of a persuasive one, it's Alex Salmond. That's how he arguably, I would say, approaches politics.
On the actual issue itself, I'm kind of conflicted with it, because I agree that the people who've done that work should have the right to get the benefit of it, but I'm kind of against blood sports in general. And I know it's shooting rights, but still it's kind of bad taste in my mouth stuff. But I think it ties in quite well with what Kate said earlier, because we don't want to have the same kind of economy necessarily as London. We don't want to copy their model just in an independent Scotland. So it makes me think, if we get an independent Scotland, what's the point in cutting it up and flogging it all off in the way that's been done in other places again? Just flogging it off to the highest bidder. Another.
I think that that's just you being an effete hillhead boy about you. As someone that grew up on a sort of hunting estate which was privately owned in Argyll, I'm not so squeamish as you, perhaps, about wringing the neck of the odd pheasant, I suppose. I don't think that's a problem, and I think I am sympathetic with the general goals about community ownership, I must say, but I'm maybe not so convinced as your maybe Andy Whiteman's about the obvious benefits of communities, because communities need to be well advised, because life in the modern world, modern regulations, is really complicated. And that's not a patronizing assessment of the fact of the ordinary person. It's just the reality. It's bloody complicated. And actually, if people are going to avail themselves of these kind of collective ownership structures and make good choices about what kind of resources they have, then that's actually quite a challenge. And it's not answered by legislation which doesn't support people to realize these kind of collective goals, I don't think.
Yeah, there is a bill coming through, community empowerment bill, which purports to do some of that, about transferring assets to communities and building the capacity of communities. It's a step in the right direction. I think it could have been more radical. We haven't actually seen the final bill as yet, but yeah, I mean, it's certainly, and that's part of John Swinney's brief, and he's big on localism and community assets. And you're absolutely right, Andrew. I mean, we can't just, despite what I would like to see, which is a big handover to the kind of people of land and reclaiming ill-gotten lands from those who've benefited from them for far too long. You need to manage, and you need to build the capacity of communities to be able to do that. And to be fair to the government, they are bringing through a bill that's starting that process. But I think, it's just a curious one, because I don't think, again, it's this whole idea about what kind of Scotland we want to be if we were independent. Well, we certainly wouldn't want to be. I don't understand why the SNP doesn't take ownership of this issue a bit more, because it's always been in the party's DNA, if you like, about, the absentee landlords and the big landowners, and the fact that a tiny number of people own most of the land in Scotland. I can't think of a kind of ordinary person out there who would disagree that there needs to be a redressing of the balance, and that we don't want tax havens, and we don't want kind of green plantations all over our wild space. And I just don't understand why it's not something that they've brought to the fore, because it's not just a kind of Highland issue at all. I mean, I come from Galloway, where huge numbers of landowners and nobles of the land still own huge tracts of land. In fact, Buccleuch is the biggest landowner.
No, actually, yes, I think that's on a historical note. I'm pretty sure that one of my descendants was the factor from the Duke of Buccleuch, some of my antecedents. So therefore, I was probably oppressing the people.
on another historical note, there, I once took a little retreat to Jura to go to the house because I've always been a major George Orwell fan. To go to the house where he wrote 1984 on. It's a place called Barnhill. It's an amazing place. It's sort of 4 miles after the road finishes. You have to walk. And I always thought, because now that house is mostly used for aristocratic people coming to shoot deer, is the major use of it. And I always just wondered what would George Orwell make of that himself. But I always wondered what he would think about that.
As an old Etonian himself, I'm pretty Orwell. Heaven knows what Orwell thought about these kind of things. As a man that shot elephants and endured English public schools. It's funny. I think. I grew up in rural Argyll, directly opposite the island of Jura, actually. And I think people in urban centres do not understand how the society is structured in these kind of places, and how sort of neo-feudal and eccentric and weird and throwback they are. It took me years, actually, to begin to understand the sort of class structure of the place, because I came at it from a very sort of levelling, egalitarian, Presbyterian-inspired perspective that was very uncomfortable with ideas of class, despite the fact that I lived in this place which had a sort of almost medieval great chain of being and a very reactionary set of gender norms and expectations around women. I just find that it took me a long time, and I think it takes folk from Glasgow, from Edinburgh, almost never actually, to realise that these communities are really organised on a very different set of ideas. I don't know if that was true where you grew up, Kate.
If I have one claim to fame in life, it is that I was the SNP candidate who defeated Lady Stair to win a council ward, and that was despite her going round telling people that they would lose their jobs and their houses because they were they were Stair Estates tenants if they didn't vote for her, and people had worked out that it was a secret ballot and they would vote for the candidate they wanted. So I think there's not so much in about that, but it is complicated structure. I think what concerns me more is just the huge divide between urban and rural Scotland, and kind of a total misunderstanding since I've moved up into the Central Belt about what the purpose of the countryside is for, and it's certainly not as a nice getaway for people to go and get in touch with their rugged side at weekends. It's not a play park, if you like, for urbanites. And people actually do have to live and work there. I mean, like Michael, I am absolutely anti-shooting, but found myself in the curious position of having to work, because when I was a councillor, my council ward encompassed quite a lot of shooting rights, and having to kind of leave with that because it was actually a big source of income to the local economy, and just having to kind of bite down on my own principles because it wasn't necessarily what was good the local economy at the time. It's not to say that, I would be appalled if, we became independent and we still encouraged that kind of mentality, of people coming into our land and, getting to shoot our wildlife, if you like, and kind of, for the sake of fun. And it's not, these are the kind of things I would like to see changed about our economy, and particularly about our rural economy, and make it much more sustainable.
Actually, I don't sympathise so much with that. I think my first pay packet was derived from pheasant beating, in which we were carted around in the back of a sheep, kind of sheep. What would you call it? Like a container of some sort, like on the back of a Land Rover. Well, the guns were all shimmied about in a kind of bespoke shooting thing. It sort of articulated something perhaps important about the them and us structure of the society in which I grew up in. But
as an 18-year-old, I was going to take one of those jobs to go and have a look at it and do a big expose, the cruelty. But sorry for that, Andrew, but I thought about it, but in the end I didn't do it. And probably no one would have listened anyway. So.
There you are. Well, okay. Well, maybe that's a good moment to move on to our very last topic, very briskly. This week, the issue of trial by jury's come up a wee bit, and I'm quite interested in this as someone who's a bit obsessed about law in this country. And I wrote a small blog about it, about the fact that in Scotland only 1% of our trials, of criminal trials, are actually jury trials. And juries have come under quite a lot of flack as a result of their decision of a particular jury in the Price trial around the Chris Hoon points in your speeding cards. I wonder, Kate, what do you think about trial by jury as a just general proposition? Do you think it's something worth defending for our more serious cases, and would you be happier if you were up before the beak to be up before a professional judge to decide your case?
Oh, kind of torn. I mean, I have to say, like probably everybody else, surprised at how few jury trials there are these days in Scotland. But that, there has been this kind of gradual erosion, if you like, and transfer of decision-making powers to judges and sheriffs. I'm sure that there's probably an echo there with a shift away from common law into much more statutory provisions as well. I'm kind of torn because I think it's a good thing to involve lay people in the law, but by the same token, I'm not a big defender of the kind of traditions of the law, and because they are the traditions of the law, then that's where we should stay. For example, corroboration, kind of where you've got the whole of the legal establishment arraigned against our Justice Secretary, for daring to tamper with one of the kind of touchstones, if you like, of Scots law. But I think, to me, the central thing is that the justice system has to be made to work in the interests of everybody that it's there to serve, and that's society as much as victims and others. And, lay people should therefore be involved and engaged a bit more. I mean, I know that that particular jury has had brickbat because of the kind of questions that it asked. I think that's a wee bit unfair. I did see one commentator say something about, well, how do we know that was actually, maybe they were just exploring all those things and they just were making sure it wasn't, we can't say that by asking those questions, that was the basis on which they were going to make their decision. I think if anything, what it shows up is what a big expectation we have on ordinary people to kind of go in and understand what is going on in law with absolutely no training whatsoever. I heard somebody giving evidence to the Justice Committee who said one of the ways that we can improve the justice system is if we teach Scots law or basic tenets to children and young people, so that everybody leaves school with a much better understanding of the law and legal principles and how the law works in Scotland. And I can't disagree with that.
No, and in many countries it would be part of a civic education, would it not? Michael, what would you think? Would you be happy for your shameful crimes to be tried before a jury, or would you prefer just have judges determining your fate?
Well, I think with the technical argument, if there's technical or forensic evidence and stuff, it depends how well it's presented. You can always make it more understandable if there's that kind of problem. Maybe that's the job. Maybe that's kind of a good lawyer and a bad lawyer, or a good defence and a good prosecution. I don't know, but another thing, just if I tell an anecdote, maybe you can keep me right here, but if I'm going to step off the line, but I'm sure if I don't say any names, I'll be okay. But one of my friends went on jury duty, and that isn't one of those media, one of my friends, really me. No, it wasn't actually me, because I didn't do it. But one of my friends went on jury duty, and the thing that he said that sort of worried me about the concept of trial by jury was not that people didn't understand the technical or forensic evidence. It was that he said that basically the other members of the jury just wanted to go home and were completely bored by the whole affair. I'm not going to say what it was or anything, but it could, and he didn't tell me either.
Yes, you're very, very wise, because of course one of the problems is we don't know how juries work, because we can't research them.
Yeah.
Because it's contempt of court to discuss what happens in jury.
What basically, I don't know if I can say this, you can keep me right, but what I basically heard about the affair was that a lot of people just wanted to go home. Would judges also be so dismissive? That's more your area of expertise. It's their professional job, but there's this kind of image of the jaded judge. They see 50 of these cases a day and they don't bother to check it out properly. Or is that completely unfair?
I think we don't have the evidence to say behind that. I mean, they're very scrupulous, our judges and our legal professionals, most of the time. And so I think there's a degree to which you can have a certain faith in them. But I think Kate's point that she raises about, was it important that the ordinary folk are engaged in criminal justice? And I think that's a foundationally important question. And if you look at the research on most people, most ordinary folk that find their way into courts, they have a terrible time of it. I mean,